This will sound very strange, but this 2017 Super Bowl between the Patriots and the Falcons, this Super Bowl that is known as the 3-28 Super Bowl, this Super Bowl 51 that is known for its 25-point deficit comeback, the biggest comeback in Super Bowl history, is a prophecy from the righteous Christian God of the Bible that is pointing to the use of the 25th Amendment to appoint Barack Obama as the 51st vice president in his big comeback. This Super Bowl involving the New England Patriots and the Atlanta Falcons is also part of a prophecy that is pointing to Harrison Ford, the pilot in Star Wars of the Millennium Falcon. And God has used Harrison Ford's infamous aviation mishaps to point to the coming aviation mishap of Kamala Harris in a plane crash due to a bird strike. The Atlanta Falcons' nickname is Dirty Birds. Her crash is predicted to be on November 28, 2023, which is leading to Barack Obama replacing her as the 51st vice president through the use of the 25th Amendment, predicted to be on December 26, 2023, in his big comeback. The date that this video was posted proves that these predictions are being made ahead of time, as do these time-stamped emails and Forensic Notes PDF documents. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. For football fans, Super Bowl 51 will forever be remembered as one of the most exciting Super Bowls of all history. For myself, living in Boston at the time and being a Patriots fan, it was definitely the most exciting football game I have ever watched. This Super Bowl will forever be remembered for its 28-3 score deficit that the Patriots came back from in the closing minutes of the game to produce the biggest comeback in all of Super Bowl history. This Super Bowl goes by the nickname 28-3, which refers to the score that the Patriots came back from with 8 minutes and 13 seconds remaining in the third quarter of the game. The game turned around for the Patriots when they got the ball back with 8 minutes and 13 seconds left in the third quarter, down 28-3. However, the designated home team in this game was the Atlanta Falcons, and properly saying this score is in fact 3-28. In this video, I will demonstrate how this 3-28 Super Bowl revealed the day that Kamala Harris's Air Force Two plane will crash due to a bird strike. As I was watching the final minutes of this game unfold, I had a very, very strong sense that God was behind this game. But it took me a couple of years to start to figure out what exactly was going on with this game. The biggest thing about this game was the score, and the score reveals the date 3/28. Let's begin with confirmation of this with the fact that James White, player number 28, scored 3 touchdowns. MVP Tom Brady, after the game, said that James White deserved the MVP award. Player number 28's 3 touchdowns confirms the significance of the 3-28 Super Bowl score, and there is added symbolism to this with his name White, which symbolizes purity, and his uniform being covered in blood by the end of the game. This symbolized the perfect sacrifice that Jesus Christ made, the price he paid in blood as a ransom for our sins. The New England Patriots are the most important sports team that God uses in his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. And other videos explain the significance of the Patriots, including the must-watch Super Bowl video part 26 on this channel. And so I won't explain this prophetic significance of the Patriots, but it symbolizes America. Boston being the city of the spiritual founding of America, and the Patriots winning the Super Bowl in 2002, just a few months after the 9/11 judgment warning. The key to understanding Super Bowl 51 and this 3-28 Super Bowl is the symbolism in the Atlanta Falcons. First, Falcons fans nicknamed their team Dirty Birds. In prophecy, dirty birds are associated with the Antichrist. Alright, this video has been in production since early 2021. This knowledge of this connection between the 3-28 Super Bowl and the prediction that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on October 17th, 2023. However, as time goes, knowledge regarding God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections increases exponentially and builds on prior knowledge. And so I'm recording this actually in October of 2023, just a few days before October 17th. The rest of this video after this introduction regarding this diagram will be a combination of different recordings that date back to early 2021. The entire video will be amazing, so make sure you watch all of the video. All right, today is November 5th, and I am interjecting this update here into this video. The signs, well, a couple of things. First of all, as I just said, this video was recorded before October 17th, and the amazing prophetic signs that occurred on October 17th, including a prophetic Kamala Harris plane sign in her Air Force Two plane, are explained in the must-watch Gaza explosion video on this channel. But these signs revealed adding an additional 3 sets of 7 days. To get the date, it is now predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. And so, in other words, October 17th was yet another step in the trail of signs that is leading to Kamala Harris's death in a plane crash. And again, this is relevant because we are talking about the Falcons. You'll see as I explain this video, this amazing video. Keep watching. All right, so we've got that out of the way here. So regarding the big deal about this particular video, which is that Super Bowl 51 is a prophetic sign pointing to the 51st vice president and the big comeback of Barack Obama, which will be the result of Kamala Harris dying in a plane crash. That said, it was only yesterday, yes, it was yesterday, that it occurred to me more of the prophetic significance of James White. James White, who is number 28. And now I understand why he was number 28. I didn't understand before. But it is very clear why James White is number 28 and why his jersey was bloodied. It was for the symbolism that I just explained. But also, and very importantly, James White, the initials JW, who played for New England, the New England Patriots, which, as I said, God is using as his most important team in his prophetic signs to point to the spiritual founding of America with the Pilgrims, including the John Winthrop flotilla that arrived in 1630 and founded the Massachusetts Bay Colony and Boston. And John Winthrop, his initials are JW. And that's why James White. But John Winthrop, before he disembarked and before the Pilgrims disembarked the 11 flotilla ship, when they arrived in the bay, John Winthrop delivered his famous City on a Shining Hill speech, which is derived from Deuteronomy chapter 28. And it is the chapter in the Old Testament in the book of Deuteronomy regarding Moses' words to the Israelites before they crossed the Jordan River and into the Promised Land. And the Pilgrims saw their crossing of the Atlantic as analogous into the New World, as analogous to the Pilgrims crossing the Jordan River and the desert into the Promised Land. Like the Israelites, the Pilgrims were escaping religious and political persecution from the king of England, whereas the Israelites were escaping the king of Egypt. And there are many parallels, and this is by God's design. The spiritual founding of America is designed this way, and it is symbolism for how America is God's Gentile nation. There are only 2 nations in the history of the world that were founded on a relationship with God, Israel and America. And so through the New England Patriots and this most prophetic Super Bowl, God pointed to this through James White, who arguably should have been the MVP. But Tom Brady also needed to be a big part of this game, as I will explain. And he was the MVP of the game, because this game is about the comeback. But let me just finish up on James White there. John Winthrop is the reason for James White. The two initials hint at each other, and John Winthrop's City on a Shining Hill speech was derived from Deuteronomy chapter 28, which is the chapter regarding Moses' words regarding God telling the Israelites of the promises of blessings and curses after they go into the promised land. They will be blessed if they follow God's commandments and obey God and follow God's word, whereas they will be cursed if they disobey God and disregard his commandments. And the entire story of the Bible is this relationship between the Jews and God reprimanding them and cursing them when they disobey God. And so that's what God is warning through John Winthrop. And John Winthrop and warning America through John Winthrop, not just the Pilgrims. This was the spiritual founding of America. John Winthrop went on to be the first governor of Massachusetts, and he lived on and prayed on to God Governor's Island, which in the 20th century was converted into Logan International Airport. John Winthrop arrived with his 11-ship flotilla, and that's why it was Flight 11 that departed Logan Airport and flew into the North Tower on 9/11. It was a warning of judgment and curses described in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 10 through 11, which is what God was pointing to on 9/11. And that is, for that matter, the reason for the 11 in 9/11. It points to the promises of blessings and curses and John Winthrop's 11 flotilla ships. And furthermore, the 101 passengers that arrived on the Mayflower also hint at 11, and they took 66 days to cross the Atlantic, and 66 is the 11th triangular number, and on and on. The number on the propeller of the Titanic is 101, which hints at the Mayflower and the 101 passengers, which all hints at 11, because the number 11 in the Bible symbolizes God's promises of blessings and curses. And so, anyway, this is why John Winthrop, and the reason why his shirt is bloodied, is it is symbolic of curses and the coming curses and destruction of America. And this destruction of America will come through the Antichrist, who will make a comeback, the biggest comeback in all of history, if you will. Just like this Super Bowl was the biggest comeback in all of history. And what Super Bowl was this? This was Super Bowl 51. And this is because Barack Obama will make his big comeback and become the 51st vice president, which will enable him to become the president again. And this is why Tom Brady, the GOAT, greatest of all time, which hints at the GOAT Antichrist. In the Bible, goat is symbolism for the Antichrist. Through the ritual the ancient Jews would conduct on the Day of Atonement on the Temple Mount, which is the date that the Antichrist will be defeated at the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ on the Day of Atonement in 2024, October 12th. By the way, yesterday was 1 year before that date. And incidentally, it was realized the prophetic significance of James White on that day. That's a personal sign for myself. I didn't realize that until I just said it, though. And so Tom Brady also made a comeback in this Super Bowl. Not only did his team make the biggest comeback in Super Bowl history, which was amazing to behold, but at this time in the GOAT of football's career, Tom Brady, he was making a comeback after being unjustly condemned for something that was unjust, which was the Deflategate controversy. And quickly, the Deflategate controversy was about 11 out of 12 footballs that were supposedly intentionally deflated, although it wasn't the case. And it was part of this mass hysteria regarding this human instinct to resent the successful guy. This is the politics of the left in general. Their politics are motivated in truth. In truth is motivated in resentment and bitterness. And so this was this instinct to gang up on Tom Brady after having, at that point, won 4 Super Bowls. And so anyway, so it was 11 out of 12 footballs because Tom Brady was number 12 and he replaced number 11. And this is because this is part of a bigger sign that is this symbolism of the 11th hour going into the 12th hour, which is what the 9/11 judgment warning was. It was Flight 11 with a crew of 11 people that flew into the Twin Towers that looked like a giant 11 in New York State, the 11th state to join the Union, in New York City, which is made up of 11 letters. And there are many other 11s in the 9/11 signs. And this is because Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness, the 12th hour. And in ancient Israel, it referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness. But in English, it's an idiom that means last chance. Time is running out, as in the last chance for the nation to repent and turn back to God before judgment destruction, which is what the 9/11 judgment was. 9/11 signs were. They were judgment warning of this, pointing to Isaiah 9:11. And so anyway, Tom Brady was making a comeback after all of this Deflategate scandal. And he was suspended for some games, and he had this tarnished image in the league, which was unjustified. And so after the suspension of the 4 games and all that big drama, everyone has forgotten about it because that's the point, to have forgotten about that, because Tom Brady redeemed himself. He became the greatest of all time after that. And no one even remembers that anymore, how everyone hated him, or a lot of people did back then. Anyway, so, and a big part of that comeback was this actual literal comeback, is my point. But all of this comeback is pointing to the comeback of the 51st Vice President, Barack Obama. And so let's begin here in this story here regarding this 3-28 Super Bowl. Again, it was Super Bowl 51, but what's now realized is that this point deficit that was overcome was 25 points. And that is because the Antichrist will become the 51st Vice President through the use of the 25th Amendment. And this will be how he will overcome the restriction on someone being elected to the White House more than twice. He will be appointed instead through the 25th Amendment. Sure, this will go through the Supreme Court, but this will be the ultimate ruling. And so that's why the 25-point deficit in this biggest comeback in history of the GOAT, which hints at the GOAT Antichrist, the 51st Super Bowl, which hints at the 51st Vice President. Now, to confirm this, we have this 23 months connection and this 9 years connection back from this February 5th, 2017 date. And what I will do is just briefly play a clip that explains why God pairs 9 and 23 together. But this is how God's big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And when we think about it, one simple way in which he would provide a second witness is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 9 and 23. And now I'll explain why. All right, before I play the clip that explains why and how God pairs 9 and 23 together, I'm just going to play a clip that I just made, an amazing clip. The 9 and 23 clip is also amazing. But I'm just going to hold off that for just a couple more minutes while I play this clip that explains more this significance of the number 11 and 28. Because what you just heard, the last 10 minutes or so, was recorded before it was learned that the date that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash, the predicted date, is the date 11/28. And so that's why that's amazing. When this happens, know and remember that what you just listened to was known before the date 11/28 was known. Basically, a little while ago, I woke up half asleep with the question on my mind, what would be the most symbolic date related to the big event, the crash, the predicted crash of Kamala Harris? And that answer was easy. It occurred to me that the date, knowing what I know now, it's clearly November 28th. And then looking back, or rather confirming this with all sorts of other connections, it's clear that this is the date. But I'm going to play a clip now that explains more. It's amazing the significance of 11 and 28, which is what I've just been getting at in the last 10 minutes, with this 11 symbolizing God's promises of blessings and curses from Deuteronomy chapter 28. And then after that, I will play the clip that explains why God pairs 9 and 23 together, and then we will get into this truly profound diagram. According to the Bible, God created man in his own image.
And it's this idea that will ultimately begin us on our journey in unraveling the number 11 pattern found within Numbers. So let's begin our second subtopic, Numbers, because it too is an important concept in the Bible, because numbers are found everywhere in the Bible, like the number 7, 12, 40. There's even a book of Numbers. Another interesting example is the number of the beast, because that particular example highlights the use of numbers and validating that they are important. However, are these two concepts related between an image and numbers? Well, to draw that connection, let's begin with a metaphor, using an image and a mirror. So let's imagine a mirror with a 1 placed here. It would create a reflection, resulting in the image of a 1. Similarly, if we start on the number line, 11 is the first numerical number along the number line to have repeating digits or reflecting digits, and can be further demonstrated when we place a mirror here in the middle of 11. We could say that 1 reflects 1, whereas 10 or 12 don't, because 1 doesn't reflect 0, nor does 1 reflect 2, and so on, hinting at the fact that the number 11 represents reflection. Another important thing to mention is that not only does reflection create an image, but that the image is symmetrical. And what is fascinating is that the number 11 will act in the same way as a mirror, creating a symmetrical image between all other numbers. This can be amazingly demonstrated by this 10 by 10 chart, representing all 2-digit numbers from 0 to 99 in numerical order. And if you notice, the numbers going down diagonally are numbers that are divisible by 11, starting with 11, 22, 33, 44, and so forth. And if you notice, it acts as our axis of symmetry between the rest of the numbers. For example, let's look at the 34-43 branch. As we follow it out, we have 25 and 52, 16 and 61. Lastly, we have 7, which is symmetrical to 70. This particular example is similar to the 45-54 branch, and subsequently all other branches follow this exact same relationship, demonstrating that the number 11 is literally a number of reflection, creating a symmetry between the numbers that branch off of it. And lastly, another unique connection to the number 11 can be found between each symmetrical pair when added together, because the sum of any two of these numbers is divisible by 11 as well. So let's go back to our first branch that we used in our first example and see the connection. Because 34 plus 43, 25 plus 52, 16 plus 61, and 7 plus 70 all equal 77. And 77 is divisible by 11, which is also shared between all other symmetrical pairs as well, like 58 and 85. When you add those two together, 143. Divide that by 11, 13. So now that we see that the number 11 represents reflection, like as in symmetry,
the number 11 is symbolic of reflection, and this is why the number 11 in God's prophetic signs is symbolic of the reflection in Deuteronomy chapter 28, in which God described his promises of blessings and curses for the Israelites, depending on whether they obey his commandments or not. The contrast between blessings and the opposite curses is a reflection. These promises of blessings and curses were given to the Israelites before they crossed the Jordan River into the Promised Land. Likewise, the pilgrims saw their crossing of the Atlantic to the New World as analogous to the pilgrims' crossing into the Promised Land. This is why John Winthrop delivered his famous Shining City on a Hill sermon as the pilgrims crossed the Atlantic and before they disembarked their ships in the New World. Winthrop's sermon was derived from Deuteronomy chapter 28. He made it clear to the pilgrims that founded the nation of America that there would either be blessings or curses for them and their descendants, depending on whether they would follow God's commandments. It just so happens that John Winthrop's flotilla consisted of 11 ships, which pointed to this reflection and the contrasting promises in Winthrop's sermon. Similarly, it was 101 pilgrims that arrived at Cape Cod on the Mayflower. 101 hints at the number 11. The journey on the Mayflower took a long, arduous 66 days, and the number 66 is the 11th triangular number. In a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 11th row is 66. John Winthrop became the first governor of Massachusetts, and he lived on Governor's Island, which in the 20th century was converted into Logan International Airport. It was from Winthrop's Island on 9/11 in 2001 that Flight 11 departed. Flight 11 had a crew of 11 people, and it flew into the Twin Towers that looked like a giant 11 in New York State, the 11th state to join the Union, in New York City, a name that is made up of 11 letters. And this is because Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which in ancient Israel referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness, and in English is an idiom that means last chance, time is running out, as in last chance for the nation to repent and turn back to God before judgment destruction. In Ronald Reagan's famous farewell speech to the nation from the White House Oval Office, he used the phrase and theme of a shining city on a hill, which he deliberately borrowed from John Winthrop in order to reference the spiritual founding of the nation in the righteous Christian God of the Bible. In his address, he also mentioned John Winthrop's name. Reagan's speech was on January 11, 1989. The date January 11th, 1/11, hints at the number 11. Before becoming the president, Ronald Reagan was the governor of the 31st state to join the Union, California. The 11th prime number is 31, and on the 31st anniversary of Reagan's City on a Shining Hill speech, 11 people were killed on the date 1/11 in 2020, due to Winter Storm Isaiah, a hint at the prophet Isaiah in the Bible. On this same day, the MVP in what was at the time the most recent Super Bowl, player 11 for the New England Patriots, was arrested at 9 p.m. in Los Angeles for vandalism. This is because Flight 11 on 9/11 was a flight from New England to Los Angeles. 9 plus 11 days after 11 deaths on the date 1/11 due to Winter Storm Isaiah, President Trump trumpeted the phrase "prophets of doom" in a major speech. The 279th word in Strong's Greek New Testament Concordance is the word meaning unrepentant. This is why Reagan's Shining City on a Hill speech was 279 days before the major prophetic warning of God's judgment that was the 1989 World Series earthquake. This 279 days was also exactly 40 weeks, and when asked by his disciples for the signs to look for of his return, Jesus replied with the metaphor of birth pains in context of earthquake signs. According to the medical profession, the average human gestation period is 40 weeks. Santa Cruz is Spanish for Holy Cross, and this is why the epicenter of the 1989 World Series earthquake occurred in the Santa Cruz Mountains, 10 miles from Santa Cruz, California, and caused a section of the Bay Bridge that connects the two cities that were playing in the World Series at the time of the earthquake to collapse, which hinted at the bridge between man and God, which is the cross, having been collapsed. And in the most central prophecy in the Bible, in Daniel chapter 9, the Messiah is put to death on a cross after a period of 69 weeks, which is why the earthquake was a magnitude 6.9 and was in California and was exactly 40 weeks after the City on a Hill speech by the 40th president, who was the governor of California. And the 1989 World Series earthquake hit and caused fires throughout San Francisco, a city known for having been built on hills. It is because the number 11 symbolizes God's promises of blessings and curses for his nation in Deuteronomy chapter 28 that it is predicted that U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on the date 11/28 on her way to or coming back from the 31st state, which will lead to the curse of the Antichrist president. From the 40th president's City on a Hill speech on 1/11 in 1989, it was exactly 40 weeks to the 1989 World Series earthquake. The most valuable player of the 1989 World Series was player number 34, and the World Series earthquake was in turn exactly 34 years to the prophetic signs on October 17, 2023, which included a prophetic sign involving Kamala Harris and her Air Force Two plane. October 17, 2023 is in turn 1 month and 11 days to Harris's predicted crash on the date 11/28, and 1 month and 11 days hints at the date 1/11 in 1989 when Reagan delivered his City on a Hill speech. God uses the number 23 to reveal the identity of the Antichrist, the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school. In the Old Testament in the Bible, it is described how 2 goats were used on the Day of Atonement in the ritual on the Temple Mount. In Bible prophecy, there are 2 antichrists, and in Bible prophecy, it is said that the Antichrist will rule the Temple Mount during the end times period, and the Antichrist will be vanquished from the Temple Mount at the return of Lord Jesus Christ on the Day of Atonement in 2024. Goat is Antichrist symbolism. Goat stands for greatest of all time. And this is why the 2 goats of basketball wore jersey number 23, Michael Jordan and LeBron James. The GOAT of basketball, Michael Jordan, played for Chicago, and the GOAT Antichrist, the basketball president, is from Chicago. LeBron James is famous for being from Cleveland and having played for Cleveland and having won the NBA Finals championship for Cleveland, breaking the supposed Cleveland sports curse, which is Antichrist King symbolism, which is why LeBron James goes by the nickname King James. And this was used to point to the president Grover Cleveland, who was the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, skipping the 23rd presidency, just like the Antichrist will serve non-consecutive terms, having skipped the 45th presidency. In God's true big picture of end times signs, patterns, and connections, the number 9 is the most important number, as from the Bible it symbolizes God's judgment, and the number 23 is the 9th prime number, and the number 45 is the 9th triangular number, which in a triangle of numbers, the last number in the 9th row is 45. This is why Michael Jordan, in the exact middle of his career, after having won 3 NBA titles and before winning his other 3 NBA titles, retired briefly, and when he returned, wore jersey number 45 for coincidentally 23 games. And it is why Michael Jordan, in his last game as a Chicago Bull, another city God uses to point to the Antichrist, who is also from Chicago, scored 45 points against the team from the 45th state. Like Michael Jordan, LeBron James also played in Cleveland, then famously left Cleveland in much controversy, and then returned again to play a second time in Cleveland in order to win the championship for Cleveland and break the Cleveland sports curse, which symbolizes the Antichrist curse of Barack Obama when he will return to the White House for his second presidency. In other words, the hiatus in the middle of Michael Jordan's career in Chicago and the hiatus in the middle of LeBron James's career in Cleveland hint at the hiatus of Barack Obama skipping the 45th presidency and returning to the White House for a second presidency. It will be his third term, which is why Michael Jordan won 3 championships and then briefly retired before returning a second time to win 3 more championships. It is predicted that Barack Obama will become the 48th president on November 19th or November 21st, 2023, a few days after it is predicted that Michelle Obama will become the 47th president on November 13th. God pairs the numbers 9 and 23 together in order to confirm the signs and connections and to reveal the identity of the Antichrist, the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school and became president in 2009, and will become the president again in 2023. From the Bible, the numbers 9 and 23 both symbolize judgment, and the number 23 is the 9th prime number. The only grandfather-grandson presidents were the 9th and 23rd presidents, William and Benjamin Harrison. The 9th president, William Harrison, died on the calendar date April 4th, 44, which hints at the 44th president. Harrison died exactly 1 month after his inauguration. The name Harrison hints at Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash due to a bird strike and lightning and turbulence in St. Louis on October 17, 2023. And the Antichrist Barack Obama will rise to power and become president again through her replacement, which is what is hinted at with the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, President Grover Cleveland, who skipped the presidency of Benjamin Harrison. The 23rd president, which is why LeBron James, who played for Cleveland, wore jersey number 23. Michelle Obama will first replace Kamala Harris, and then Barack will replace Michelle. Michelle is the feminine version of Michael, which is the reason for the name Michael in the name Michael Jordan. In the Bible, the Hebrews crossed the Jordan River into the Promised Land. Barack Obama's famous autobiography is named A Promised Land. Obama the Antichrist will promise the world a new world order utopia. A goat is Antichrist symbolism. The greatest of all time, the GOAT of basketball, Michael Jordan, wore jersey number 23 and jersey number 9 when he played for the U.S. Olympic Dream Team, a team that beat their opponents by an average of 44 points per game, which hints at the 44th president, GOAT Antichrist, that wore jersey number 23 and became president in 2009. If you have not already watched the Michael Jordan prophecy video on this channel, the Michael Jordan prophecy video is an essential video for foundational understanding of how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. Besides revealing the identity of the Antichrist, God pairs the numbers 9 and 23 to reveal what the mark of the Antichrist is. Bible prophecy describes a mark of the Antichrist, which if one takes, they will go to hell, and if one doesn't take it, they won't be able to buy or sell, which means they won't be allowed to buy the rationed food that will be rationed due to the coming food shortages. Ezekiel chapter 9 is the chapter that describes the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist. In other words, the 9th chapter of the book of Ezekiel in the Bible is about the mark of the Antichrist, and the mark of the Antichrist involves changing one's chromosomes. And we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. God pairs 9 and 23 to identify what the mark of the Antichrist is. And speaking of the GOAT of basketball, LeBron James, who wears jersey number 23, he gave his name, LeBron James, to a Nike shoe that is named 23 chromosomes. The pattern on the shoe is unmistakably a pattern that resembles snakeskin, and that is because the mark of the Antichrist is a snake bite. The mark of the Antichrist changes chromosomes through inserting a protruding shaped amino acid chain, and this protruding shaped amino acid chain is synthesized snake poison. In the Bible, the biggest symbol of evil, of Satan, is the serpent. The reason why the shoe is made by Nike and why Michael Jordan is known for his Air Jordan shoe made by Nike is that Nike hints at the Nicolaitan doctrine that the vast majority of Christians have, especially evangelical Christians. This Nicolaitan doctrine of our day that Jesus said he hates in Revelation chapter 2, and that he is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. This explains why many quote-unquote Christians have already taken the mark of the Antichrist. It is judgment for their doctrine. That said, nowhere in the Bible does it say that one cannot repent after taking the mark of the Antichrist. Okay, so we are talking about this game, and it was played against the Atlanta Falcons, which is very important, a part of this sign. And one thing that it does is it connects with exactly 23 months. And I just explained the prophetic significance of 23, especially when paired with number 9. To the day that Harrison Ford crashed his vintage World War II plane onto the golf course in California. Harrison Ford is known, okay, so God is using Harrison Ford for a number of reasons, but one is his aviation mishaps, which are ultimately leading to the aviation mishap of Kamala Harris, hence Harrison Ford. But the name Harrison Ford is of two presidents, as I just explained, actually. And Ford was the only president to never have been elected vice president or president. He was appointed instead through the 25th Amendment, just like Barack Obama will be. And that's why exactly 23 months later, we have the 25-point deficit that was overcome with the big comeback against the Falcons, because Harrison Ford is also known, coincidentally, because of his aviation mishaps and his aviation hobby, but he's also known for his many movie roles, acting roles as a pilot. The big coincidence is that before he became an actor, he was studying to be a pilot, but then ran out of money and then didn't take up the aviation hobby until he was in his 50s. And today he is a spokesperson for the aviation community and narrated the IMAX documentary Age of Airplanes, for example. And so, but anyway, of course, one of the big roles of him as a pilot, although there are many, is of him being the pilot of the Millennium Falcon in the movie Star Wars. Arguably, perhaps his most famous role as a pilot. So we have him as the pilot of the Millennium Falcon, and this also and him crashing in his plane as a pilot, which connects exactly with 23 months to the Falcons Super Bowl. That's amazing. Okay, so I'll leave it at that for now. This also connects with exactly 9 years to this extremely prophetic Barack Obama sign date. The Super Tuesday tornado outbreak, which was Super Tuesday is the day of the primaries when many of the states vote in the primaries election. And prior to this, Barack Obama was running neck and neck with Hillary Clinton. But after this Super Tuesday victory, Barack Obama ran away with the lead and became the presidential nomination for the Democrat Party. So this was the pivotal day, in other words, of Barack Obama's rise as the president. All right, his defeat of Hillary Clinton on this day. And this was, at that time, the deadliest tornado outbreak in U.S. history. It was surpassed in 2011 with the costliest and deadliest outbreak on the same day that he released his birth certificate forgery. But that's another subject. Now, there were 87 confirmed tornadoes. This is a typo. And 57 deaths, which add up to 144. And this is the prophetic number in the book of Revelation regarding or symbolizing the faithful of God's that will be rescued in an evacuation from the severe persecution from the Antichrist. But also 57 is a number that identifies Barack Obama, because just after this, he made his infamous 57 instead of 50 states gaffe, when he, on the campaign trail in a speech, said, or I don't know if it must have been a speech, when he said that he had been visiting 57 states, or he had been to 57 states. Or maybe he had been to a certain number of them out of 57 states, but regardless, it was his 57 states gaffe, which is especially remarkable because he is from the 50th state. And so, of course, he should know better that there are only 50 states. And of course he does. But this was a Freudian slip, spiritually, because it identifies Barack Obama, because what is also remarkable about this 57 states gaffe is that the 44th president grew up for 4 years in Indonesia, one of the Islamic Organization of Cooperation nations, which is made up of 57 states. And so that's quite something. And so anyway, 9 years, because the number 9 is the most important number in God's true big picture of signs, which is only being explained on this channel. As from the Bible, the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment. And this 9 years exactly connects with this 23 years exactly to this Super Bowl 51, which, as I am claiming, is a prophetic sign from God that is identifying that Barack Obama will become the 51st vice president through the 25th Amendment. Okay, after a plane crash, hence the Falcons, a dirty bird. And Kamala Harris's plane is predicted to crash due to a bird strike, which is also why Harrison Ford flew a Millennium Falcon and is known for his airplane crashes. Okay. Now, Barack Obama was born on the 216th day of the calendar year, And 216 is 6 times 6 times 6, which hints at 666, the number of the Antichrist in Bible prophecy. And that gets us to this date, which is 328. This date was known ahead of time to be something very important in God's trail of signs. And one reason being was this connection to the 3 to 28 Super Bowl. So this is amazing. And on this day, we had the wettest 2-day period, or the second wettest, because the first wettest was also a prophetic sign, the flooding in Nashville in 2011, but that's another story. This 2 days of wettest rain in Nashville history coincidentally coincided precisely with Passover, which begins at sunset on the one day and then goes into the sunset the following day, and that's when the rain happened. It happened after sunset and went to the next day. Anyway, it was the 16th state, and God uses 16 to hint at 4 times 4, the 44th president, and it was first reported there were 4 deaths. It was also the 4th tragedy in Nashville in the last year. There was the blackout the prior year, the derecho storm, and the Christmas morning bombing in downtown Nashville, followed by this flooding. Okay, so that's another hint at 44. There's much more to this, though. Nashville, and it was, for example, the only major city wholly within the path of totality of the Great American Eclipse. But that's enough for this video of an explanation for that. And also on the same day was the prophetic church bombing in Indonesia. Again, Barack Obama was born, or rather, the 44th president grew up for 4 years in Indonesia, as I just mentioned. And the church bombings in Indonesia, or the bombings in general, have been prophetic signs. There was, for example, the 202 people that were killed in 2002 by 2 suicide bombers, exactly 22 years before the Day of Atonement in 2024 and the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ. That's explained in another video as well. But that is one of the countless, and I mean it literally, confirmations that the second coming will be on October 12th, 2024, exactly 22 years after the 202 deaths in 2002 by 2 suicide bombers in Indonesia, where Barack Obama is from. Okay, and by the way, there were 2 suicide bombers in this church bombing here on the state. And by the way, also prior to the state, I was expecting an explosion sign. That was what I was expecting. I'm also expecting Kamala Harris's engine to explode, but I was also expecting a bombing on this day, and that's what happened. It's amazing. And that one reason being is that it was why I knew this date was also this connection. I think this was probably the first connection that I figured out, the date 328. And maybe then I backtracked and realized, well, what about the 328 Super Bowl? Does it connect? And then sure enough, it does. But anyway, this date 328 was exactly 23 years after, and by the way, James White's number was 28, right? And he scored 3 touchdowns, which hints at 328 as well. Forgot to mention that. Maybe I mentioned it before. So 23 weeks exactly, again, Obama. And this is the church, and 23 weeks. Well, okay, never mind. I'm getting ahead of myself. 50 weeks. This was a church bombing. The Feast of Pentecost symbolizes the church. Pentecost is also known as the Feast of Weeks. Pentecost literally means 50th day, and so hence the 50 weeks connections in God's signs, especially from church signs, as is the case right here. But I got ahead of myself there. We have this prophetic sign here, which was also known in advance and also known to be a date of an explosion. And the main reason why this date was known ahead of time was that there were these connections from Harrison Ford. And then we had this explosion, the national news story of the explosion at the strip mall in Harrisonburg, Virginia. That was one of those moments where it's, I don't know how to describe it, when you jaw-dropping isn't enough of a strong enough expression to use. But needless to say, it's confirmation that what is going on here with this channel and God's big picture of signs that is only being explained on this channel is on the right track. This Harrisonburg explosion. This was prior to realizing that God was using Harrison Ford to point to Kamala Harris's death in a plane crash because of his aviation mishaps. But prior to that, it was realized that God was using Harrison Ford and his aviation mishaps. But anyway, so the point is that this was expected ahead of time, and there was an explosion in Harrisonburg, Virginia. This location was a hint at the path of Flight 77 on 9/11, which is why Kamala Harris will die in a flight path on the same flight path from Washington to Los Angeles on this date here, 10/17, which will hint at 11 times 7 equals 77. Okay, 23 weeks. Well, again, because it pairs, because it's an Obama number. Okay, so there's more to it, but there were 3 people injured. This was exactly 90 months, which pairs with the 23 weeks. This was 90 months exactly after the explosion and the 3 deaths at the finish line of the Boston Marathon. And these 3 injured were at the finish line of a marathon, which hints back at the 3 deaths at the finish line of the marathon of the Boston Marathon 90 months exactly earlier. And that, in 2013, the Boston bombing was exactly 101 years after the sinking of the Titanic, and the 101 because of the 101 passengers on the Mayflower. That's why the 101 years between the sinking of the Titanic and the Boston bombing. But again, it all points back to Massachusetts and Boston with the 11-ship flotilla and the 101 passengers on the Mayflower. Okay, now let's go, since we did the 50 weeks, the main theme of God's big picture of science is judgment warning for the church. You won't hear that message probably anywhere else. And that's because that's why this is God's true big picture of science not being explained anywhere else. Because this is the truth of the matter. God is very, very displeased with the church. A lot of Christians, quote unquote Christians, have an idea that the reason for the end times and the Antichrist is judgment on the world. But no, it is primarily judgment for the church. The purpose of it is for the testing of faith of quote unquote Christians. Make sure that you watch the 23 church signs video on this channel, arguably the most important video, especially if you are a Christian. Again, make sure you watch the 23 church signs video when the prediction comes to pass. I don't know what you are thinking if you don't watch that video. All right. Now, getting 50 weeks exactly forward from this, we have another Tom Brady sign confirming the trail here. And this was the day that the 44-year-old GOAT to football announced his return for a 23rd season. And this was the same day that the 44th president announced that he had the CVD disease 23 days before he returned for the first time to the White House to celebrate his Obamacare anniversary. And nationalized health care is for the thing that Obama's presidency is most known for, is symbolic of nationalized health care that will enforce the mark of the Antichrist, which is the thing. The thing that you can't talk about is the mark of the Antichrist. Case closed. Case closed when the prediction comes to pass. Make no mistake, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the thing is the mark of the Antichrist. It is not a supposed precursor to the mark of the Antichrist, and it does not need an additional something, such as an additional technology to go with it, or a false form of religious worship, or some supposed different age of dispensation after supposedly all Christians will be raptured. In fact, one of the reasons why many quote-unquote Christians have already taken the mark of the Antichrist is that it is judgment for this particular doctrine. Many people took the mark of the Antichrist believing that it wasn't the mark of the Antichrist because it couldn't be, because of this particular doctrine, which Jesus said he hates in Revelation chapter 2, and is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. This doctrine is dispensationalism, but is part of the group of doctrines that make up what Jesus is referring to as the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day. And again, make sure you watch the 23 church signs video on this channel. I do not know what you are thinking if you do not watch it. But again, after this prediction comes to pass, I think you should know that you should watch every single minute of every video on this channel. That, in my opinion, would be the logical conclusion. Now, this return of the GOAT announcement, the 44-year-old GOAT returning for a 23rd season, and by the way, that's because God pairs 23 and 44 to confirm the signs and connections, just as he pairs 9 and 23 together. And the reason is that the 44th president, the basketball president, wore jersey 23 when he played basketball in high school and will become the president again in 2023. And that's why God pairs 44 and 23 together. And that's why the 44-year-old GOAT announced a return for a 23rd season on the same day, with a tweet announcement on the same day that the GOAT, the 44-year-old GOAT of football, announced his return for a 23rd season on the same day that the 44th president GOAT Antichrist announced he had the CVD disease in a tweet 23 days before his return to the White House. Now, this day was also exactly 23 weeks after the prophetic return of the GOAT football game, in which Tom Brady and his Buccaneers returned to Boston to play the Patriots for the first time. It was billed as such. It was very much hyped up, this return of the GOAT game. If I recall, it was a Monday night football game. No, maybe it was a Sunday night football game, but it was very hyped up. And so this 23 weeks connects to his 23rd season announcement and his return, the return of the GOAT. And again, God pairs 9 and 23 together, and that's why these 23s, all of them, connect with this 9 months. Now, when asked by his disciples for the signs to look for of his return, Jesus replied with the metaphor of birth pains. And 9 months is the average human gestation period. And so 9 isn't only a number that symbolizes God's judgment here, but 9 months connections are also prophetic because they symbolize the birth pains of the end times and the Antichrist, which is why we get this prophetic day involving these football signs, among many other signs. This is what I call a super date for signs. There are many, and it would take an hour to explain all of them, but including the ones I'm about to explain, because I'm only going to touch on them. This was the day that the air raid coach, the GOAT of college football coaching, speaking of GOAT, greatest of all time, this was the GOAT of college football coaching's day of his death. He was born in the same year as Barack Obama. He was known as the, which is 1961, which is the 18th prime number, which is 6 + 6 + 6, which hints at the Antichrist. He was known for his revolutionary style of offense that was nicknamed air raid, which hints at the air raid of the bird in Kamala Harris's airplane, which will cause her crash. Okay, and this coach won the title of Coach of the Year nationally twice, and for his conference 3 times, which hints at 23, which pairs with the 9 months, exact 9 months. And also on this day, we had this quarterback, the star quarterback of the Falcons, which ties back into the Falcons Super Bowl, and Harrison Ford, the pilot of the Millennium Falcon. This quarterback for the Falcons, Marcus Mariota, the big news was that he, during a practice, bolted. He just left the stadium, and no one knew when he would return. The big headline was, "When will he return? We do not know." It was speculated that there was trouble with this man, perhaps mental health trouble. And so that's also why they were questioning when he would return. There was no word. He just bolted, which is quite something for a professional football player to do. And that's why it was big news. Okay, so, and the point here too is that this guy's name is Marcus, which hints at the mark of the Antichrist. Furthermore, this day, by the way, the big thing was the Defense of Marriage, Biden signing it, the Respect for Marriage Act on the White House lawn. So this was a White House sign. Kamala Harris was there, and I think she spoke as well. And Cyndi Lauper sang her song, True Colors, which was symbolic of the true colors of the Antichrist, which is Satan and evil. Not only is leftist politics evil, and I mean that literally, spirit of Antichrist, but anyway, Barack Obama, that's his true colors. So Marcus, and he will enforce the mark of the Antichrist through his nationalized Obamacare, etc. And so that's why Marcus Mariota didn't return, or no one knew when he was returning. It was hinting at the return to the White House, hence the Respect for Marriage Act, which was all about condoning homosexuality, which is an abomination in the Bible. Okay, and so anyway, you get the point. The Antichrist return and the mark of the Antichrist, which is, by the way, why it connects with 9 months to his CVD disease. More of a confirmation. We have the White House sign and the Marcus Mariota sign, return sign, connect to the White House sign, which in turn connects to his return to the White House for what? Obamacare, which will, nationalize health care, enforcing the mark of the Antichrist. Okay, it's astounding. Now, this date was known ahead of time, big time. This date was known big time ahead of time. One reason being is that it was 90,011 days after the founding of the nation on July 4th, 1776. And by the way, 1776 is 4 times 444, which hints at the 44th president Antichrist. And also this day was exactly 1109 weeks after 9/11, and God pairs 9 and 110 together to confirm the signs and connections and to point to 9/11. And I've explained that way too many times to do it again and play the clip again here. But I just wanted to just briefly touch on that to confirm for you. We have the plane crashes on 9/11 connecting to this date, which in turn connects with 44 weeks exactly to the predicted plane crash of Kamala Harris in St. Louis, the other city in the middle of the country over which the path of totality went over, just like in Nashville, hence the trail of signs through Nashville leading to St. Louis. And so 44 weeks, obviously, because it's the 44th president we are talking about that will become the president again through this plane crash. But also God pairs 9 and 44 together to confirm the signs and connections. And God pairs 9 and 44 together because the 44th president became the president in 2009. That is, of course, just scratching the surface. Now, last connection here is this exact 90 weeks, which is also 630 days. To the date, it is predicted that Barack Obama will become the 51st vice president. And there we have the completion from the Super Bowl 51, this trail of signs, okay? 630 days happens to be exactly 90 weeks, and that's quite something because 63 hints at 3 sixes, the number of the Antichrist in Bible prophecy, 666. 90, because the number 90 symbolizes the number 9, and the number 9 from the Bible symbolizes God's judgment. It is the most important number in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel. And as I explained earlier, God pairs 9 and 23 together. And that's why this is astounding beyond words, jaw-dropping, even though the prediction hasn't happened yet. But when the prediction happens, of course, that'll be even more jaw-dropping. But this was the day, April 5th, 2022, that Barack Obama returned for the first time to the White House since he had left. It was a big news story about how he had returned for the first time. God uses firsts in his signs for that matter. He was returning to the White House for what? He was returning to promote, or rather celebrate, an anniversary for his signature law that his presidency is known for, his Obamacare, which is symbolism for nationalized health care and the mark of the Antichrist, which is related to what I just said, as most of us, or many of us now know. But this is, anyway, confirmation that it is the mark of the Antichrist. Now, that day, as I explained, this is so amazing because this has been known since 2022, this information, but this 90 weeks connection was just learned yesterday, I'll be honest. It was just learned yesterday. Today is November 21st, okay? And because I was looking at this video again, and wait a second, because I had already known that this was the date from other connections, and so I questioned, well, what is the connection between this date and December 26th? That's how this 90 weeks connection came about. That's how it works, by the way. I don't just plug in numbers and see what the date ends up being, unless there's very good reason to do so. But anyway, This, in other words, was a surprise, this 90 weeks connection, which is truly jaw-dropping because of this 23 days right here. Because, again, the 44-year-old GOAT, greatest of all time of football, Tom Brady, on this date here, announced a return for a 23rd season, and this was announced in a tweet. And on this same day, the GOAT Antichrist, the 44th president, hence the 44-year-old Brady, announced in a tweet that he had the CVD disease and was happy to have taken the mark of the Antichrist and encouraged others to take the mark of the Antichrist. And this was 23 days, which is why Brady was returning for a 23rd season before Obama returned to the White House for the first time. But not only that, as I explained, this was also exactly 23 weeks. Brady's announcement for a return for a 23rd season was exactly 23 weeks after the return of the GOAT game, the big celebrated, I think it was a Monday night football game. No, maybe it was a Sunday night football game. Big deal in the NFL. I think it was the most watched game of the season for sure. And by the way, also in attendance was the passing king. And in this game, Tom Brady became the new GOAT of passing yardage, coincidentally, in this particular game in Boston, in which Drew Brees, the Saints, New Orleans Saints number 9, was present because Tom Brady was probably going to pass his record. And God uses records for signs. And the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment, and this is why Brees plays for the Saints. Because the main theme of God's big picture of end times judgment warning signs is judgment warning for the church. And you will not hear that pretty much anywhere else. And that's one reason why this, on this channel, is God's true big picture of signs. Because the other channels will talk about God cheerleading his church, but this isn't the case. God is very, very displeased with his church. And the reason for the end times and the Antichrist now is because of the state of the church now. And furthermore, it's quite clear from the Bible that the primary purpose of the Antichrist is to test the faith of quote-unquote Christians. But anyway, that's why the Saints number 9 was in attendance at this Return of the GOAT game. But anyway, this 23 weeks is what I'm saying essentially is more confirmation of the 23 days, which pairs with the 90 weeks exactly, which also happens to hint at 666, to the date it is predicted that Barack Obama will become the 51st vice president. And that, in turn, all the way connects back to the 51st Super Bowl, when the 25-point comeback, hence the 25th Amendment that will be used, predicted to be on December 26th, 2023. And it'll be a third term for the president, hence the 3 to 28, as I'll explain in a second here. So anyway, there you have it. This is so amazing. I can't say how pleased I am that all of this has come together here with finally understanding the end point for the Super Bowl 51, biggest comeback in Super Bowl history, pointing to the big comeback for the Antichrist, President Barack Obama. All right, I can't recall if I included or whether or not I explained fully the 3 to 28 score and also James White and his 3 touchdowns and his jersey number being 28. It hints at the third term for the president who is symbolized by the 28th president. That's another thing that I forgot actually. Woodrow Wilson, considered to be the father of modern progressivism, which is evil. And today, Barack Obama lives in the same residence that Woodrow Wilson lives in, and there are many parallels between the two presidents, one being their residence, and furthermore, them continuing to live in Washington, D.C. after their presidency, unlike other presidents. And that is because both of them, Woodrow Wilson schemed to serve a third term, but he was unsuccessful because of his stroke. Likewise, Barack Obama is scheming to serve a third term. Also, they both won Nobel Prizes for Peace for basically doing nothing. Well, especially Barack Obama. And on and on. I explained in another video. Also, Daniel 3:28 is the verse in that chapter that is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist and worshiping the Antichrist and Satan. Daniel 3:28, this is also why the coach that blew the lead for the Falcons, his coaching was largely responsible for this loss. His name is Dan, and that's why it's another confirmation of how this 3-28 is actually pointing to Daniel 3:28. And the third term for the president that is symbolized by 28, but also Deuteronomy 28. And that's why, again, James White hints at John Winthrop and his famous City on a Shining Hill speech that was derived from Deuteronomy 28 before the Pilgrims departed and founded New England at the spiritual founding of America, and hence why the team in this game is the New England Patriots. And it is all pointing to Deuteronomy 28, God's promises of blessings and curses for them that are founding the relationship of the nation with God, the Pilgrims, and Americans thereafter, and whether or not they follow God's commandments or not depends on or determines whether they will be blessed or cursed by God. And so there you have it. This is an amazing thing, this 3-28 Super Bowl. It also just occurred to me that 3 times 28 is 84, and 84 is a number that hints at Barack Obama, who was born on the date 8/4, August 4th. The inverse of 8/4 is 48, and he is predicted to be the 48th president, which is one reason why he was born on the date 8/4. Also, it is the 216th day of the calendar year, and 216 is 6 times 6 times 6. But anyway, 3 times 28 is also a hidden reference to Barack Obama because it equals 84. The key to understanding Super Bowl 51 and this 3-28 Super Bowl is the symbolism in the Atlanta Falcons. First, Falcons fans nickname their team Dirty Birds. In prophecy, dirty birds are associated with the Antichrist. Also in Bible prophecy in the book of Revelation, a prominent and prophetic number is the number 144. Exactly 144 weeks after this 3-28 Super Bowl was a game that the Atlanta Falcons played against the New Orleans Saints in New Orleans. The Falcons won this game, and it was a major upset for the first place team, the Saints. God uses the New Orleans Saints in his big picture of signs as judgment warning for the American church. In the Bible, the number 9 symbolizes judgment, and this is why their star quarterback, Hall of Famer Drew Brees, is player number 9. This game was the first game in New Orleans that the Saints played since Drew Brees arrived in New Orleans that they didn't score a touchdown, highlighting the significance of Drew Brees in this sign. In this game, Drew Brees was sacked 6 times. In the Bible, the number 13 is Antichrist symbolism. Nimrod, a type for the Antichrist, was the 13th generation from Ham. Haman, another type for the Antichrist, persecuted the Jews on the 2 13th days of the months. And the 2 Antichrists are described in the book of Revelation in chapter 13. In this prophetic game, the Saints were favored by 13 points. The 13th catch for player number 13 for the Saints was a 13-yard gain. The Dirty Birds scored 13 points in the first half and then 13 points in the second half. All of this lends this game Antichrist symbolism. The date of this game, on 11/10/2019, was also extremely prophetic because it was the 50th anniversary of the first ever Sesame Street episode. Other videos have explained the significance of Sesame Street and the puppet Big Bird. In this trail of signs, it is more confirmation that Kamala Harris's plane will crash due to a bird strike, a strike of a big bird. Also again, falcon symbolism is pointing to this. The number 50 is one of the three most important numbers God uses in his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. And in the Bible, a 50-year period is extremely important and symbolic, and in his signs, a 50-year period is extremely prophetic. And this is why this 50th anniversary of the first Sesame Street episode is important. And this 50th anniversary was a national news story. And also in the must-watch Star Wars prophecy video on this channel, it is explained how the date of the retirement announcement, which was a national news story of the actor that played Big Bird for literally 50 years, was also extremely important. Also, in the must-watch Jeopardy prophecy video, it is explained how the date of the death of the actor that played Big Bird for literally 50 years is also extremely important, and also reveals the day that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash due to a strike of a big bird. The most central prophecy in the Bible is the 70 weeks prophecy in Daniel chapter 9. This is why 70 weeks connections are extremely prophetic. Exactly 70 weeks after this prophetic Saints-Falcon game was March 14th, 2021, and the day that player number 9, Drew Brees for the New Orleans Saints, announced his retirement. Other videos have explained in detail the significance of this, but Drew Brees is the NFL's passing king, and this sign of his retirement, which is a sort of death or a passing away, is pointing to the passing away of James Earl Jones, the voice of Mufasa, the king in the movie The Lion King movie. And James Earl Jones also plays a dying and dead king, King Jaffe Jaffer, in Coming to America. On this March 14th date, Queen Beyoncé was nominated for 9 Grammy Awards, and it is well known that she is obsessed with the number 4. She won an award for Best Video for a song from her album The Lion King, and Queen Beyoncé also starred in the live-action Lion King along with James Earl Jones. On March 14th, her 9-year-old daughter also won a Grammy Award, and her name is Ivy, because Ivy, sounded out, is the Roman numeral for the number 4, IV. And player number 9, Drew Brees, is known for having won Super Bowl 44. These signs of the numbers 9 and 4 is why we add 9 times 4 days to the day that Kamala Harris visited an electric bus company in High Point, North Carolina. And 9 plus 4 is 13, which is Antichrist symbolism, and this is why we add 9 and then 4 days to the Feast of Passover and the epic flooding that occurred in Nashville that killed 4 people. And the day that the controversy over the Satan shoes erupted in social media and in the mainstream news. These Satan shoes make a reference to Luke 10:18, which is when Jesus said he saw Satan falling from like lightning from heaven, which is exactly what Kamala Harris's plane crash will symbolize when she falls from the sky and then is replaced with the Antichrist as vice president, who will then become president. And the other videos also explain the relevance of 23 and why it is 23 days. The number 23 reveals the identity of the Antichrist. Returning back to the date of the Falcons-Saints game, which, by the way, was on the date 1110, which hints at 11 times 10, which is 110, one of the 3 most important numbers God uses profusely in his end times big picture of signs, patterns, and connections. And again, this game was filled with the number 13 symbolism, which is Antichrist symbolism, and player number 9 was sacked 6 times. And this game was 66 days, which is Antichrist symbolism, after Drew Brees, player number 9, threw the organization Focus on the Family under the bus. Radical gay rights activists had tried to cancel culture Drew Brees after he lended his support to Bring Your Bible to School Day that was organized by Focus on the Family. The criticism of Drew Brees is that Focus on the Family does not support homosexual marriage. And so rather than sacrifice his fame and standing in the New Orleans community and nationally, Drew Brees capitulated and apologized and said he didn't agree with Focus on the Family. The reason why this is important is because Drew Brees is known for being a professing Christian. And again, God is using the saints in player number 9 to symbolize judgment warning for the American church. The hallmark of the Antichrist kingdom will be persecution of Christians and a test as to whether they believe the Bible is the Word of God. And in the Bible, it says that homosexuality is an abominable sin. Hence why this sign with Drew Brees involving Bring Your Bible to School Day. When asked by his disciples for the signs to look for of his return, Jesus replied with the metaphor of birth pains. According to the medical profession, the average human gestation period is 40 weeks. Also, 9 months symbolizes a human gestation period. That's why in God's big picture of signs, 9 months and 40 weeks connections are extremely prophetic. From the date that player number 9, Drew Brees, threw Focus on the Family under the bus, it was exactly 9 months to the other cancel culture controversy that Drew Brees got entangled in. Drew Brees had said in an interview that he didn't think it was appropriate to be kneeling during the national anthem. June 8th, which was exactly 9 months after Drew Brees threw Focus on the Family under the bus, was the day that Drew Brees exchanged tweets and social media and an Instagram post with President Trump regarding this controversy. The left ganged up on him, including teammates, and as a result, Brees capitulated, he surrendered, and he kneeled, which is very symbolic. It symbolized kneeling to Satan. And this is also, by the way, the kneeling is for 8 minutes and 46 seconds because that is the time at which the first plane struck the first tower on 9/11 at 8:46 a.m. It was another capitulation, just like he capitulated to the homosexual activists. Another sign that symbolizes the test that Christians will be going through in their persecution from the Antichrist in the end times period. This controversy has a symbolic date, June 8th, because the word Trump in archaic English means trumpet and sounding of a trumpet, and President Trump is God's trumpet that he uses to trumpet and highlight his signs. And on this June 8th date, which was 9 months exactly after player number 9 threw Focus on the Family under the bus, was the day that Drew Brees exchanged controversial tweets and Instagram social media posts with President Trump. Exactly 40 weeks after this was March 14th and Drew Brees, player number 9's announcement of his retirement, as I just explained. Let's return back to the symbolism in the Atlanta Falcons. The city Atlanta is symbolizing Atlantis. The name Atlanta is rooted in the name Atlantis, a mythical location that Plato wrote about. If you Google search Atlantis, you will find the real-life Atlantis. On June 7th, 1692, an earthquake caused the city of Port Royal, Jamaica, to literally sink under the water. The 7.5 magnitude earthquake caused the land in this harbor to liquefy. About 2,000 people died as a result of the earthquake and the following tsunami, and another 3,000 people died in the days after following the earthquakes due to injuries and disease. Port Royal, Jamaica was known as, quote, one of the wickedest places on earth. Quote, it was the home for many privateers and pirates operating within the Caribbean Sea. The Reverend Cotton Mather in Boston said in a letter, quote, behold, an accident speaking to all our English America, quote. This quote confirms that this earthquake is part of these signs that is symbolizing judgment on America. As a result of the earthquake, there were many landslides throughout the island. The largest, the Judgment Cliff landslide. This displaced 800 meters of land surface and killed 19 people. This cliff is named Judgment Cliff, and it was the largest landslide of all of them, and this confirms this sign as being a judgment warning sign. Super Bowl 51 is known for the 3-28 score. It is known for the Patriots' comeback against the Atlanta Falcons. Atlanta comes from the name Atlantis, and this real-life Atlantis occurred exactly 328 years before June 7th in 2020, which was an extremely prophetic day. It was Pentecost, which means 50th day, and on this day, Tropical Storm Cristobal hit the Gulf Coast with maximum wind speeds of 50 miles per hour. Pentecost symbolizes the church. Cristobal was known for its tornadoes that it spawned. One of them touched down in Columbia, Florida, and knocked a huge sign and blew it many yards up against an evangelical church. God uses the name Columbia to symbolize America, and this was a literal sign against the church, a judgment warning sign. Cristobal is Spanish for Christ follower, and this tropical storm Cristobal was what is called a rare crossover storm. This storm crossed over from the Pacific Ocean over Central America into the Gulf of Mexico. This rare crossover storm symbolizes the cross on which Jesus Christ paid the ransom to the ruler of this world, Satan, for our sins. The atonement did not appease the supposed angry wrath of God, as many evangelicals will say, so that we can cross over from death into life. The number 110 is one of the three most important numbers God uses in his signs, as Joshua died at the age of 110, and Joshua symbolizes judgment, as it was Joshua that led the Hebrews around the walls of security of the ancient city of Jericho 7 times over 7 days, while 7 priests blew 7 trumpets. This was a 3 sets of 7, and it includes a march. What confirms this 328 years connection between the Atlantis in Jamaica and this Pentecost on June 7th, 2020, is the news story that reported how the Atlanta Falcons team participated in a Black Lives Matters march. The news did not report on multiple teams of the NFL marching in these protests, only the Atlanta Falcons. The 3 sets of 7 in the book of Joshua is why this Pentecost was 21 days, which is 3 sets of 7 days, after May 17th, and the day the death toll from coronavirus reached 90,000. 21 days later, the death toll reached 110,000, and God pairs the numbers 9 and 110 together, not only because they are 2 of the 3 most important numbers God uses, and both symbolize judgment, but because they hint at 9/11 and the 110 floors that collapsed in the Twin Towers that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street, where George Washington was inaugurated, and Wall Street is named after the original 9-foot-high wall of security that the Dutch built to keep the British and the Indians out. Which brings us back to Joshua symbolism, and Joshua died at the age of 110 and led the Hebrews around the security walls of Jericho before they collapsed in judgment. May 17th was also the day of the 9th episode of the Last Dance Michael Jordan docuseries, which, as explained in other videos, was symbolizing the last chance to repent for America. And this 9th episode regarded the flu game. Michael Jordan played an NBA Finals game while having the flu, and afterward he said that he couldn't breathe. It was the day of coronavirus flu reaching 90,000 deaths, and this 9th episode was aired 9 days before the I Can't Breathe protests began on Chicago Avenue in Minneapolis, and Michael Jordan played for Chicago. 328 days is 47 weeks, and exactly 328 days after May 17th, 2020 will be April 10th, 2020, and the day of the Kingston St. Vincent sign, which is explained in the must-watch The Lion King video, the Lion King prophecy video. And the media reported how the residents of Kingston on this day woke up to ash, a layer of ash covering their streets and homes, and how the island of St. Vincent is a population of 110,000. This number was included in all of the news stories that I read. And also what was included was how the residents of Barbados were concerned and were experiencing the fall from ash 110 miles away. That number also was in all of the articles that I read. The 110 miles distance to Barbados. This 110,000 people and 110 miles parallels the 110,000 death toll on Pentecost in this diagram. In fact, from the 110 deaths on Pentecost, which by the way symbolizes the church, to the 110,000 people on the island and the 110 miles story, it is exactly 44 weeks, which hints at the 44th president as the Antichrist and his relationship as the Antichrist with coronavirus and his persecution of the church. The Antichrist king, hence the Kingston sign. What is also truly amazing is that Kingston in St. Vincent is a Caribbean island, and this is being connected to with the earthquake in Jamaica, the real-life Atlantis that was a judgment warning. The 47th president will be the Antichrist, and as we can see here in this diagram, 47 weeks is 328 days, which is what is being pointed to through the 3-28 Super Bowl. After Kamala Harris dies in a plane crash, the Antichrist will be appointed to the office of Vice President as her replacement through using the 25th Amendment. The 25th Amendment is also embedded in the 3-28 Super Bowl score because the deficit of points was 25 points. The Patriots' comeback was a 25-point deficit. 3 sets of 7 days after April 10th will mark the beginning of the 1,260-day period of the end times before the Antichrist is vanquished by the return of Lord Jesus Christ in October of 2024. Was the beginning of the 1,260-day period that is described 7 times in Bible prophecy. The mountain of evidence as high as Mount Everest that has been accumulated since 2017 overwhelmingly confirms that the second coming is in 2024, and actually overwhelming is an overwhelming understatement. And by the way, one of the purposes of the predictions being made in this video is to prove this. And the Day of Atonement being the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ in 2024 is 1,260 days after May 1st, May 2nd, 2021. In context of this 1,260 days mentioned in Revelation chapter 12, we have a description of a red dragon being thrown down from heaven to earth. And although this day was known ahead of time, May 1st, of course, since 2017 it was known, on this day we received the sign that absolutely confirmed all of this analysis, which was that SpaceX's Dragon capsule with its Dragon crew returned from outer space, the second heaven, and splashed down to Earth at 1 a.m. local time. On the date IR20, which is the date that the Hebrews departed Mount Sinai and left into the wilderness, and in the description of Revelation chapter 12, after the dragon is thrown down, it describes the Jews that are chased into the wilderness. 47 weeks exactly, or 328 days after the prophetic Pentecost on June 7th, 2020, and the March of the Atlanta Falcons, which in turn was exactly 328 years after the real-life Atlantis. Also, on February 20th, 2021, Flight 328, which hints at 328, from Denver to Hawaii, a state God uses to identify the Antichrist, which according to the airlines was a 47-hour flight. I assume that incorporates the return aspect of the flight. I'm not sure. I think it refers to the 47 hours of the plane leaving from Denver and then coming back to Denver. The engine of this Flight 328 exploded, causing debris to fall over a neighborhood of Denver, and air traffic control told the pilots to return to runway number 25, hinting at the 25th Amendment for the 47th president. And the must-watch The Lion King prophecy video explains this sign in detail, but of course this Flight 328 engine explosion is also pointing to the plane crash that will be caused by a bird strike and the explosion of an engine. The must-watch The Lion King prophecy video explains the significance of Colorado and the 38th president, Colorado being the 38th state to join the Union, the 38th president being Gerald Ford, the only president to have not ever been elected vice president or president. Instead, he was appointed using the 25th Amendment, just like this upcoming Antichrist will not be elected, thus overcoming the 22nd Amendment, which restricts someone from being elected to office more than twice. And this may sound like a stretch, but I know that it is true from many other signs in God's signs, patterns, and connections. The engine was engine number 2, and this is hinting at 2 antichrists. the book of Revelation speaks about there being two antichrists, the 47th president will actually be the second of the two antichrists who will get his power from the first antichrist. This is also, by the way, the reason the Atlanta Falcons quarterback Matt Ryan was player number 2. The name Ryan is Irish for little king. This fits as well because dirty birds is symbolism for the first Antichrist from Revelation chapter 18, which is referring to the cardinals at the Vatican. Also, this news story regarding this Flight 328 was focused heavily on the airplane model Boeing 777, which gives us a 3 sets of 7, and confirms this as a judgment warning sign. There are 3 sets of 7 that preceded the collapse of the security walls of the ancient city of Jericho when they collapsed in judgment from God. And in the book of Revelation, there are 3 sets of 7 judgments from God. Also, the engine explosion of this Flight 328 is 328 days before the day that Kamala Harris will crash in her plane when her engine explodes. I almost forgot the perhaps most important connection of all. There is a direct connection from the Falcons-Patriots Super Bowl, the 3-28 Super Bowl, to the date 328. From the Super Bowl in 2017, on February 5th, 2017, it is exactly 216 weeks to 328, 2021. 216 is 6 times 6 times 6, which is Antichrist symbolism. The number 666 is associated with the Antichrist in the prophetic book of Revelation in the Bible. The Antichrist was born on the 216th day of the year. What is a second witness confirmation to this? Is earlier in the video I mentioned prophetic retirement announcement of the actor that played Big Bird for literally 50 years. This announcement was on the same day as the prophetic sign that was the long-range rockets that were launched accidentally due to lightning. And in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus said he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven. And the Antichrist's name in Hebrew means lightning from heaven. But this was the first long-range rocket attack on Israel since the end of the 50-day war. The number 50 again, it connects with the retirement announcement of the actor that played Big Bird for 50 years. There was the war in 2014, the Middle East war between Israel and Gaza, the Hamas in Gaza, that is named the 50-day war, and exactly 216 weeks from the end of this 50-day war to the long-range rockets that were launched due to lightning on October 17th, 2018. And so again, the symbolism in the Big Bird is that this plane will be struck by a big bird. But anyway, that 216 weeks confirms the 216 weeks exact connection between the Falcons 3-28 Super Bowl and the signs that occurred on the date 328 in 2021, which in turn are connecting to the day that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash due to a bird strike, a dirty bird. The Falcons are nicknamed the Dirty Birds. Also, speaking of the president Gerald Ford, God is using Harrison Ford because his two names, or one of the reasons is because his two names are the two presidents, Ford and Harrison. Again, Grover Cleveland was the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, just like Barack Obama will serve non-consecutive terms, and he skipped the 23rd presidency, the presidency of Benjamin Harrison, and Ford hints at, of course, Barack Obama not being elected but appointed instead, thus overcoming the 22nd Amendment. Harrison Ford is famous for his aviation mishaps, and one of the most famous of all of his mishaps is when he crashed his vintage World War II plane onto the golf course on March 5th, 2015, which was exactly 23 months, a prophetic number of months, extremely prophetic. God is used in many other connections. 23 months exactly later was when the 3-28 Super Bowl with the Atlanta Falcons, the Dirty Birds, that's connecting to the day that Kamala Harris crashes in her plane. And so there, as you can see, is the connection from Harrison Ford's most famous aviation mishap to the day that Harris, that's another reason why Harrison Ford, Harris falls in her plane and crashes in her plane. All right, let's take a closer look at this most beautiful, elegant connection illustration that God has demonstrated between Harrison Ford and Kamala Harris and her plane crash. In fact, this connection here we are looking at is so extraordinary, it's so beautiful that I intend to make or cut this out of this video and just make a shorter teaser video in order to promote this 3-28 Super Bowl video, which is one of the most important videos on this channel. So again, Harrison Ford, the reason, again, his name, Harrison and Ford, are hinting at the two presidents God is pointing to. Benjamin Harrison was the 23rd president, and this is why we have this 23 months connection here. Grover Cleveland was the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, having skipped the 23rd presidency. This is pointing to how Barack Obama will also serve non-consecutive terms. Cleveland, well, one of the GOATs of basketball, player number 23, is famous for having won the championship for Cleveland, breaking the supposed Cleveland sports curse. That's another story that's been explained in other videos. So that's Harrison. Ford was the 38th president, and he was the only president to never have been elected vice president or president. He was appointed instead vice president, and then he replaced Nixon when he resigned as president. And this is exactly how Barack Obama will rise to power. First, he'll replace Kamala Harris, hence Harrison, and then replace Joe Biden after he resigns because he is becoming more and more confused and elderly. From this most important, well, all of them are important, but Harrison Ford is known for his aviation mishaps. This was the one when he crashed his plane into the golf course in California, the state that Kamala Harris represented as senator. This in itself is an amazing prophetic sign, and it's explained in other Harrison Ford videos on this channel. So I won't explain the details of this sign, just that this was the major plane crash sign of Harrison Ford. Of course, Harrison Ford's aviation mishaps are ultimately pointing to the aviation mishap of Kamala Harris. Okay? So we have exactly 23 months. This isn't by far the only instance of 23 months, and how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works is it works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming matters, and as the Bible says is required, and this is what makes it true and different and unique from other things. What makes it true and not a product of one's imagination are the second and third and multiple witnesses. This is how his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. And so this isn't the only instance of 23 months. And again, the number 23 also reveals the identity of the Antichrist, the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school. All right, so 23 months exactly, we get to the 3-28 Super Bowl. And this video, the 3-28 Super Bowl video, is explaining some of what is going on within this this is such an astounding prophetic sign, this Super Bowl. And in fact, I'm going to need to make a part 2. But anyway, if you're watching this as a clip for this, as a promotion to the 3-28 Super Bowl, know that you need to watch this video. And on that note, you need to watch every single minute of every video. And that, if you want to understand God's big picture of signs, because it's a big picture, you need to watch them all. Furthermore, there are extremely important messages that are being communicated, and that's another reason for watching every minute of every video. All right, now, this Super Bowl is famous for how the Falcons lost their lead of 3-28. And this connects with Harrison Ford. And Harrison Ford is known for his aviation hobby, which he took up at the age of 50. He actually trained to be a pilot while he was in college, but he ran out of money. And then he became an actor and didn't resume his passion for flying until later in life. But by coincidence, his acting career was filled with him in roles as a pilot. And I've listed that in other videos, so I won't list it here. But one of them, of course, was in Star Wars. He was the pilot of the Millennium Falcon. The name of his airship, spaceship, was Millennium Falcon. And that isn't an accident that it connects with 23 months exactly to this Falcons Super Bowl. In other words, it's another second witness confirmation to these connections. It's just amazing. All right, now 216, well, the Antichrist was born on the 216th day of the calendar year, August 4th, and 216 is 6 times 6 times 6, which of course from Bible prophecy is associated with the Antichrist. And that's why from this Antichrist Super Bowl, and by the way, I'll explain elsewhere, but the 3 to 28 Super Bowl is actually pointing to the verse, the most important verse in Daniel chapter 3, verse 28, which is a prophetic foreshadow of the mark of the Antichrist. All right, and so that's why, that's more reason for the 3 to 28 Super Bowl. It's pointing, and I'll explain that elsewhere. But anyway, that's why 6 times 6 times 6 months, or weeks, from the 3 to 28 Super Bowl, which is an Antichrist sign, to the date 328. One of the signs on this date was the Satan shoes sign. This was the day that the controversy erupted over the rapper that sold 666 pairs of his Satan shoes that contained a drop of real human blood. And on the side of the shoes was typed Luke 10:18, which is the passage in the Bible where Jesus said he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven, which is exactly what will be symbolized when Kamala Harris falls from the sky in her plane crash and then is replaced with the Antichrist, Barack Obama. So, and Barack Obama is the basketball president, and these are basketball shoes. And that's why, and he wore jersey number 23, and that's why it connects with the 23 months over here. You can see all of the symmetry in this diagram even. It's just amazing. Now, this was the day of the Indonesia bombing in Indonesia, and Barack Obama grew up for 4 years. The 44th president grew up for 4 years in Indonesia. And there are these bombings in Indonesia. There are many signs involving Indonesia that are revealing Barack Obama, but this ties into another trail of signs or a theme of signs with Indonesia, which are these bombings. And on this day, there was the church bombing in Indonesia, which is, of course, symbolism for how the Antichrist will persecute the church. One confirmation of this, which again, God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections is an interconnected web. And when you try to describe one part of the web, you end up pulling the entire web. And so it's extremely difficult to explain because it's not linear. It's infinite. You can go through it in an infinite number of ways. And also it involves and requires the second and third and multiple witnesses confirming matters. And so one thing needs to be confirmed by 2 or 3 other things, which need to be confirmed by 2 or 3 other things, and on and on and on into infinity. But anyway, I'm just going to cut it off here with stating that Indonesia points to the 44th president who grew up there for 4 years. And this sign here was exactly 4,444 days after the eclipse over Indonesia. Only Indonesia and the Indian Ocean, and actually paralleled the path of the waves from the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004. And also went over Jakarta. It went only over Indonesia and Jakarta, where Barack Obama, the 44th president, grew up. And this was just days, in fact, just 6 days after the 44th president's inauguration in 2009. It's the Indonesian eclipse, which points to the 44th president that had just become president. Anyway, moving on. On this day also, 4 deaths in the Nashville flooding, the epic flooding, the second most highest amount of rain in 2-day period. There's much more to this as explained in the must-watch The Lion King prophecy video. And the reason for Nashville, symbolically in his signs, God's signs, is that Nashville was the only major city to be wholly within the path of totality of the Great American Eclipse Judgment Warning sign. And it was in the middle of the country where the eclipse peaked, and it peaked at 1:17 p.m. 1:17 p.m. was hinting at the 117th Congress, during which the Antichrist will rise to power. And the reason for Nashville also is because, in this case here, is because the next Great American Eclipse will pass over the path of totality of the first one exactly where it peaked. And so it will engender a cross, but more specifically, it will engender a Tav mark, which the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist in Ezekiel chapter 9 was the Tav mark, those that received it were spared from the judgment destruction. And this is ultimately pointing to the mark of the Antichrist, these two paths of these eclipses. And so that's what's being pointed to with Nashville. And I just summed it up with just a couple of sentences. There's reams and reams of things to tell you about what I just said, but I'm not going to go off on that. The point, though, is that this connects with the 3-28 Super Bowl, which, as I just mentioned, is pointing to the mark of the Antichrist because of Daniel chapter 3:28. And it connects with 6 times 6 times 6 weeks. And so that's this witness confirmation of this connection here. And again, ultimately, Nashville is part of the mark of the Antichrist symbolism, which is connecting with this Super Bowl, which is also mark of the Antichrist symbolism. But the point here is that it's a flood. And the last verse of the flood account is Genesis 9:17. And it regards God's sign regarding judgment on man, the rainbow. And the 44th president is famous for having lit up the White House in rainbow colors on the day that the Supreme Court voted in favor of gay marriage. And so anyway, this is why God pairs the numbers 9 and 17 together. Also, the walls of security collapsed or were breached, on the 9th of Tammuz and the 17th of Tammuz in the Bible. Tammuz is one of the months of the year in the calendar, in the Hebrew calendar. And the day that he lit up the White House was on Tammuz 9. But there's much more to that, and I'm not going to go off onto that tangent. It's another part of the web, and if I go on to that, I'll just explain and pull the whole web. But anyway, the reason also for 9 and 17 is because Barack Obama was president from 2009 until 2017. That's why. Also, he arrived in Washington as the senator from Illinois in the 109th Congress, studied at Columbia University while living at 109th Street in Manhattan, and will return to the District of Columbia as the president in the 117th Congress, and then become the Antichrist. So that's why 9 months and 17 days, which isn't the only instance by far of God using 9 months and 17 days connections. And that's why it's 9 months and 17 days after the basketball Satan shoes, Satan falling like lightning from heaven, to the day that Kamala Harris will fall from the sky in a plane crash, which is connecting back to Harrison Ford. It recently occurred to me the profound biblical reason why God has been using this 3-28 number so much. And it's because he is pointing to Daniel chapter 3, verse 28. In Bible prophecy, it talks about, in the book of Revelation, the end times prophecies in the book of Revelation in the New Testament, it talks about the false religious worship and the worship of the image of the beast. The beast being symbolism for the Antichrist and the Antichrist system, the Roman Catholic system, and Pope Francis. And so in Daniel chapter 3:28, we have what's called a prophetic type for this. It's a foreshadow, if you will, of what's coming in the future. And so I'll just read Daniel chapter 3, verse 28. Actually, before I read Daniel chapter 3:28, it needs to be said that prior to this, Daniel and his 2 Jewish friends are thrown into the fire because they refused to worship the image of the beast, the statue of the statue of the false god, which is symbolizing the image of the beast in the book of Revelation. And so because of that, the king Nebuchadnezzar, he throws them into the fire and they don't suffer. And we see, or it's described there being a figure, a man in the fire with them, a fourth person, what is called a theophany or a pre-incarnate Christ, appears with them in the fire, in the flames, and then the Nebuchadnezzar takes them out of the flames, and then this is the verse, 3:28. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God." This verse, in a nutshell, encapsulates the end times. The mark of the beast, what's coming, will involve forced mandatory worship in some way in the false religious system that will be attached with the VACCINE somehow. And that's the reason for this 3-28 Super Bowl symbolism. In the most important video on this channel, which is titled God's Purpose for These Predictions, I will explain the reason for why God has given me a voice through this prediction that is from God. You are making a very grave and serious error if you think you already know how I was able to know this prediction, and more importantly, if you think you already know why I was able to know this prediction. It would be very foolish for you to skip watching this most important video. You will have missed the point of this prediction. One of the purposes for this prediction is to establish that the main conclusions being stated in this video are fact. It is a serious warning for those that disagree with the things being stated in this video. And to not appreciate this is to miss entirely the point of this prediction that is from God, and it is to miss the point of this video and video channel. In the description box below, I will leave a link to the video titled God's Purpose for These Predictions. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the BitChute.com or the Odyssey.com channel. And do it now in case you aren't able to later.